Hey everyone, welcome to another live roundtable edition of DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound is a video series that we record a few times a month or every other week or so. And we explore interesting topics in DevOps, from the mainstream meaty stuff to the nooks and crannies. If it's about DevOps, we take a look at it here on DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound is sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis, worldwide leaders in automated testing. And many thanks to Tricentis for their sponsorship here. About once a month or so, we do a live version of DevOps Unbound, much like this right now. And it's really a lot of fun. And the reason it is because we have a live audience who participates here. You are the stars of this live roundtable. Now, how do you interact? How do you participate? Well, for most of you, if you're in your browser and you look at the right-hand side of your browser, you'll see the communications panel built into our big marker interface. And the first thing up there on the left, it says chat. And that's by default, I think that's on. And if you go underneath chat, you have different flavors of it. There's public chat, which means when you type, it's coming from and everyone can see it. There's presenters, which you probably not going to see. And then private chat for one-on-one chat. And Twitter we have disabled so we don't pollute the Twitter sphere. If everyone would like to maybe log into chat and just say hello from where you are, I know I always get a kick out of seeing the full range of where people are coming from us today, and including our panel members who are pretty spread out around the world. Speaking of our panel members, we have an amazing panel that I want to introduce you to today. But before we do, I wanted to quickly talk about what we're going to talk about today. So the title of today's presentation, of today's show, is Cloud Native Requires DevOps, or does it? And this was a question that came up in a live event I was doing this morning as well. How is Cloud Native grafted onto that DevOps tree? Can it exist without DevOps? And one of the questions I want to explore with it too is, does Cloud Native necessarily even need cloud? We're going to explore all this and more with this fantastic panel. Let me introduce you to them right now. First up, I want to introduce you to, and I hope I pronounce it right, Chad Bodine. Chad, is that right?
Close, Chad Bowden.
Chad Bowden. All right, I made it a little fancier, but Chad, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Chad Bowden, Chief Engineer of DevOps at Boeing, focused on making the life of developers better at Boeing.
Absolutely, and good work you do there as well. Chad, thanks for joining us. Next up, I want to introduce, she's been on our show before, April Edwards. April, hi, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me back. So I am April Edwards. I'm a senior cloud developer advocate and DevOps practice lead at Microsoft. I'm based in the UK, but I work across the world globally, developing DevOps practices, helping with DevOps content on a lot of our products, as in Azure DevOps, and just delivery to the cloud, also using things like GitHub and pipelines and all that other good stuff.
Love it. Next up, he's also been with us on a few shows before, Dr. Parag Doshi. Parag, welcome, and maybe introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Parag. I am from Tricentis, building software testing tools. So my background has been both as a cloud provider, spent 20 years at Hewlett Packard, cloud consumer, working with healthcare companies to consume cloud, even on premises, as Alan said, doesn't have to be in public cloud. And now I'm building products where I think we can help with our digital transformation here at Tricentis. I love to build engineering teams and make them successful and make our customers successful.
Love it. Welcome, Parag. And then last but certainly not least, joining us today is Shimel Ruiz. And Shimel, welcome and thank you. And tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you for having me. Well, I'm Ikshal Reza, developer advocate at JFrog, but my background is Java developer. So 20 years as a consultant solving problems. And today I'm all about DevOps. How do we help developers to embrace this new adventure?
Excellent. Welcome and thank you. So, let's start with a preliminary, right? Before we discuss DevOps and cloud native, let's just define cloud native. Do we need cloud for cloud native? Maybe we need private cloud, not public cloud? We hear about Kubernetes on bare metal. Do you have to have cloud and cloud native? What do you think? Oh, actually, I can't do that. I hold that thought for 1 second. We left out a very important person on my panel. I always do it too. He's my co-host and longtime friend, Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, good to be here. No, I was just saying, we have such a great panel. I'm going to be on chat most of the time, so nice to be here with everybody. So please join in on chat. Love to hear your thoughts there too.
Absolutely. Mitchell's also CTO here at Techstrong Group, as well as principal analyst at Techstrong Research. And thanks for and always here with us. So thanks, Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So back to the question. Cloud as a necessary component of cloud native. Thoughts on that?
I'll be the first one to put my foot in it, working for a cloud company. There's the CNCF definition of cloud native. So microservices, containerized applications, being able to run privately, publicly, et cetera, across clouds. I think as a cloud service provider, we talk about it as leveraging platform as a service when and where possible. So breaking that down into microservices, not maintaining a whole infrastructure on the back end and physical hardware, and making that portable. And I think for customers that are cloud native, they have a microservice approach. They've broken everything down and they can deploy to that pretty readily versus a monolithic app. So I think it comes a lot down to the design and the platform it's sitting on. And that's a lot how we see it at Microsoft. But from a personal point of view, absolutely. I talk to customers about breaking down monolithic apps all the time because there's so many things you can't do with it because you break the whole system. So that's my 2 cents. I'll let someone else chime in.
I'll chime in there next. I agree with April. The platforms I see actually as an enabler, platform as a service. To me, cloud is, some people think of it as a destination. I go to public cloud, or I built my own private cloud, or I've got a hybrid associated with it. But I always go back to the NIST definitions and the 12-factor principles, which were always right. Okay, distributed computing, distributed applications. We try to achieve them. We can never get all of them usually, especially when you have a lot of legacy apps. But if we are able to make applications run across a distributed set of infrastructure efficiently, we then get access to ubiquity, ubiquitous innovation, ubiquitous connection. Huge amount of automation because the vendors, the providers of cloud services, whether it's a platform or a full-blown SaaS service, are forced to bundle in that automation. And then when you put that on premises, you have the same principles. So it's not a destination, it's the ability to have automation, to have wrapped up innovation in such an easily consumed self-service manner. Back to the National Institute of Standards definition back in 2011. So cloud can be anywhere if done right.
Agreed.
Yeah, for me, it's... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mitch.
Well, it's really quickly. For me, it's actually what they have already said. It is about the size, what we are shipping, how are we leverage either the service, the platform, but it is distributing our offerings, our services. At the size, we can have a long discussion about what is the right size of a microservice, and what is how many layers are we going to take advantage of before saying cloud native. So yes, we can have cloud native or without cloud because it all depends.
I agree. Agreed. Chad, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just it's already been said. I think the architecture is the big focus, right? How you've architectured your services, availability and reliability, all the ilities, no matter where you're going to put it. That's the key.
Agreed. Before we move on, I just want to remind, because people come on late, guys, beyond telling us where you're from in the chat, we'd love to hear your thoughts, whether it's a question, a comment, an add-on. Please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A section to raise your point to the panel, and we'll bring it up to the panel. So it's funny we're talking about PaaS. I've seen the cloud. I think I've seen the cloud since we first started talking about cloud. And the first iteration was infrastructure as a service. And we talked about, well, one day that's going to give way to PaaS, platform as a service. And platform as a service will become dominant. And is that where we are now, right? And is that really what cloud native is about? More PaaS than IA, than infrastructure as a service? I didn't think so, but from what I'm hearing, some folks might be feeling that way. April, what do you think?
I think I'm going to think back to architecture because I like pictures. So I'm like literally drawing a picture in my head. When I've worked with applications that are monolithic and they have a lot of factors that go into them. They're always monolithic apps sitting on virtual machines. And sometimes something as simple as breaking that up into microservices helps break apart that application and lets you do, or even just adds functions, even like literally an Azure function that lets you tell your VM to do something and automates a task using PowerShell. That is even a microservice that your VM is not managing, and that's using platform as a service. We see so much of it because where infrastructure as a service is stagnant is the inability to scale unless you're using a VM scale set. And most people on-prem don't have that capability. So I think there's a lot of limitations to infrastructure as a service, which is why we don't tend to put it around cloud native in terms of performance and capacity and capability from the architectural perspective. So as soon as you start hooking in microservices, you started consuming PaaS, and there's just a lot of physical limitations around infrastructure as a service. So we tend to move away from it when and where possible. We see it as a lift and shift. We absolutely don't see this cloud native because they're not always portable either.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everybody in agreement with that? Disagreements? Comments?
I'd say, looking at platforms as equal to cloud native isn't necessarily what it is here, really. I see the platforms as a way of having a consistent accelerator for achieving the architectural principles. Like I said earlier, we're always right. Things like the 12 factor, keep the environment out of the code, keep your multi-tenancy out of the code, separate things properly. Because what we want, if you are lucky enough to build a service that runs anywhere on premises or in a cloud or in a private cloud, that has a lot of demand, it's got to scale like crazy. So that's a good problem to have. If you try to do it without resting on the shoulders of enablers like a platform as a service, it's just much harder. We can run a monolith on a cloud native platform. In fact, when you do a lift and shift, not that it's always recommended, but it's really hard for an application or a SaaS service, maybe that's been around for a decade or 2 decades, even before cloud was a term, to actually break that down into microservices. So I would even ask, is microservice required or a fundamental requirement of what is called cloud native?
That's a great point, because I used to think cloud native was defined by using things like Kubernetes and Docker and containers and stuff like that. But I've come to the other side of it now, where I don't think it's necessarily that infrastructure kind of stuff, but how is it microservices based? I think at some level, here's how I see the progression of this. And Mitchell captured it in the chat as well. If it has microservices, if it's a microservices-based application architecture, by definition, it almost has to be cloud native. And if it is microservices-based architecture, and you didn't use DevOps as part of that development process, I don't know if you were successful, because I don't know how you can do it without using a kind of DevOps mindset framework in that kind of thing. Now, look, I'm not the developer that Shell is, or April, or even Parag or Chad here. You guys are DevOps experts. I'm just a talking head. But what do you think?
I'll be a
Am I
little
wrong?
contrarian. I'll be a little
Go ahead.
contrarian to Mitch here, right? Is it a must? I'd argue no. It's not a must. But is it something you want to do? Absolutely. And should you do it? Absolutely. Are they required? Kind of jump into the heart of what the panel was about, right? Do you have to have the two together? No, but I think they go better together, and they complement each other a lot. And you're going to really struggle moving to cloud native without DevOps. And the converse of that, or the vice versa of that, right? Cloud native really helps what you're doing with your DevOps, right? Bringing in that scalability and high availability for your applications. And one of the other things that I wanted to toss in there with the lift and shift, I think often we get caught up when I think about a group or a company that's taking this transition to DevOps and cloud native, and they see what everybody else is doing, and they're like, that's what I want to do. And sometimes they get caught up in the perfect being the enemy of good enough, because it's a spectrum, right? Sometimes people have to lift and shift when they go to the cloud, and that's not advisable, as Parag clearly pointed out. But sometimes you have to do it, and it's this continuum or spectrum of where you are and where your team is in any of those efforts, and you want to get to where the big boys are doing it right, and you kind of use that as your goalpost. But it takes time to get there, right? And it's a real struggle, and it's very challenging to do, and you're never done, right? Because you especially when you're doing a little piecemeal at a time, when you do a lift and shift on there, it sometimes takes a lot longer to get to that end state. But yeah, I'll get off stage.
I want to add to what Chad said. If every cloud transformation I've helped our customers with, if you look at it that, okay, that's a destination I go to, and because the Joneses next door have the Ferrari and I need to do the same thing, those fail. Okay, why do we want cloud? Why do we transform? You have to go back to the business objectives. If you don't have a true business objective, then what was your whole point? So when we say, is DevOps required for cloud native? Well, let's take a step back and say, why do you want cloud native, this thing that was built for cloud or runs well in cloud? Well, there's some purpose. At the large healthcare provider I was at, they wanted to build a whole healthcare company in cloud day one. Why? Access to innovation and automation. Okay, so now I've never seen people do a cloud migration, a digital transformation, big data driving into artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. I've never seen all that successful without having automation and without having access to innovation and trying to silo yourself as one small company or even large company doing it all by yourself. So I think if you go back to what was your business objective, the impending reason to change your IT environment, then you'll come back and say, hey, wait, I really wanted IT not to limit me. I wanted to go to an environment where I have access to innovation. I want an environment that I can move at the speed of my imagination. Okay, and to do that safely so that as I confidently go on this journey, I am releasing in a pattern that gets me to that business objective.
I agree with you,
Okay.
Parag. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Excel.
I have a slightly different opinion there. For example, one of the reasons why we went into microservices and things like that is to reduce, as developers, it was to reduce or focus on different business uses, and some of the services that we provided had a different kind of usage. So for example, read could be more frequent than write for some applications. So there was a clear need of separating this kind of services into that. Now, when the idea of microservices came in, also with languages, it was like, well, you have several languages that are like fantastic for this kind of operations, but you have other, for example, programming languages or other tools that will solve this problem easily. So now even you have a very more compelling reason why to start separating the different business usages into the different services. But that also brought some kind of problem, different life cycles, different versioning, rolling out. So all that information started to create a lot of conflict. And also by releasing quickly and releasing securely, because you can do a release without following any DevOps methodologies, but it will be painful. And what we want is to be certain, safe, our releases to be reproducible, to be easy, to be consistent, and with a lot of things, security, whatnot. So that is much, much easier when you are adopting all this kind of methodologies. So for me, it was a matter of providing what was needed in the best kind of platform, or even function as a service. In my world, in Java world, there are some functionality that can be broken into the bare minimum, and this you can have like tons of instances running only providing that particular functionality. So it was reducing, deploying, and releasing and deploying in a automatic manner, reproducible and painless as possible. And obviously leveraging the interest of developers and the entire organization into the business logic, not into the infrastructure, because that's a machine job. Why put people to do a machine job if you have machines to do that?
Commodity.
April, you were going to say something?
I was going to jump off of what Parag said, but I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what Excel said on microservices. When we talk to customers about compelling reasons to go to the cloud, and we talk about configuration mistakes, failures, and breaches, 90% of outages in the cloud are due to human error every time. 96%, because we're human, we make mistake. And Excel, you said it, you're like, well, if we have a machine to do it, why do we have a human doing it? And that's exactly it. And the other, when we talk to customers, they have single points of failure all over the place. Teams are inefficient, and we want to increase their efficiency, make it repeatable and scalable. And when we talk about the human error element, it's a big compelling reason of what they want to achieve, because they've probably experienced those pain points, and it's stopping them from doing something in their organization that hurts them a lot. And that's usually where, when I was on the engineering side at Microsoft and we engage with customers, we were always presented with, this is our human problem that we have. How do we then make it something automated without using the D word of DevOps? How do we then automate it? How do we make it scalable? How do we get rid of our human problem? And every single time, that's what we did. There were still humans involved, but we got rid of the human element of single points of failure and the limitations by automating pretty much everything beginning to end that we could.
And yeah. I think that, go ahead.
I wanted to, I guess, jump onto that a little bit. Ishel brought up a good point, and not that I want to steal Mitch or Alan's job of asking questions of the panel, but what are your guys' thoughts on the panel for, compliance and security? How cloud native and DevOps helps that, right? It's hard to get away no matter where you are, as in what company you're doing and problem set you're solving, right? Compliance is almost always an issue, and certainly security is, especially recently. With all the stuff we've been seeing there. So kind of curious what people's thoughts are there.
I'll take that question because I think it is something we're seeing, and I get that question a lot. I've been asked, hey, Parag, let's run this stuff on premises, or I'm a regulated company and I can't just move to, say, a cloud environment and introduce all this automation. But then we go back to what April said. It's a lot of times I see our CIOs say, how much productivity can I get with automation, right? But that's not where it's at. To me, it's preventing the human mistakes. Okay, having a consistent manner to operate and automate your environment prevents those mistakes. So the cloud or any form of great automation packaged nicely to consume it easily and nicely as a self-service, pay per use, is very convenient actually to achieve higher degrees of compliance, higher degrees of security, better resilience, better operations, better availability in hundreds of data centers around the world, right? That you don't have to bring to the table. You don't have to be a data center expert. You don't have to know how to build infrastructure services and know how to virtualize storage across all the different types of storage and straight disks and all that fun commodity stuff. You focus more on the business application and you focus more on automating your operations. So you can go two ways at this. You could think of cloud as this big easy button that the security folks will fire you for, or the operations folks will not let you get to, right? Or you can look at it as an enabler to access that innovation and automation environment built on the shoulders of many other people as a set of reusable services, and actually be more secure, be more resilient, have better business continuity. But you have to configure it that way. It doesn't come without any investment.
I agree with you, Parag. I mean, one of the critiques, or I have this comment from both sides, from developers saying, oh my goodness, we are not security experts. Now everybody's telling me that I have to become a security expert because it's going to be part of my entire life cycle, the software development life cycle. And the developers are running scared on one side. On the other side, they tell me, well, actually, our software development life cycle, the weakest link is the developer. I'm like, okay, let's stop a little bit here. So developers have one concern, and it's usually transforming the business logic into things that actually execute that business logic. We are not security experts. We are actually spend a lot of time trying to be experts in our domains, in our languages, in our tools. So on top of that, add security as an expert, it's really way too much. So that's why we rely on the security experts and the people that are running the infrastructure. So if you ask me as a developer, do you prefer it to have it in-house, on-prem, or you prefer it to have it outside? My answer will be like the guys that are outside, the people that are outside, probably because we are one of thousands have more experience. Like you go with the hard battle specialist people that are doing that all day long. And they have the infrastructure, the know-how, and they already have faced these problems repeatedly alongside different industries with similar similar use cases, probably not business logics. So security, yes, of course. Even developers, we will follow the entire process in our DevOps workflow. We will have tight loops to recheck it. Are we security experts? No, we are not. We rely on our security experts that create policies and configure the tools that we are going to execute as part of our workflow.
I've got to say something on what Michelle just said. Developers are not security experts, but the CVEs were already in your code. So when you're running on a cloud native environment, and let's say you're going to do containerization or serverless, you usually have to rewrite functions as a service. I'm speaking of specifically. But if you're going to containerize something, the original source code or the libraries that were in that source code that you have dependencies to already had the CVEs. What these cloud native platforms have done is they put a better magnifying lens to scan them. Now we're in scanning hell, okay, to be honest. There's a bunch of false positives and overlapping things there. But as a developer, I think we're empowered because the CVEs were already there. and now we just know about them. So it's the observation that actually provides better intelligence here and will make a more secure product that actually gets delivered to customers.
And I might go ahead, Shimel.
Sorry, CVEs is just one problem. We have problems with configurations. We have with publishings, sometimes keys or databases and passwords, so best practices. So yes, I totally agree with you, like security and CVEs are already part of the source code. We sometimes generate them by uploading things that we shouldn't or not configuring correctly the tools that we're using. I mean, even one library that is very, very secure, we may not be using it securely enough because of configuration parts. So, but there is tools that we can adapt into our software development cycle. And you all know that I work for JFrog, so I can give a long list here.
And I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, Shimel. You spoke about having security teams. There's a couple pitfalls that people get into. One is, yes, you have a security team, but they have to be involved from day one. And also, a lot of times our security teams are our blockers because they don't understand what developers do and they block them. But we need to enable our developers to do more. And the security starts when our developers are cloning their code without question. So the reason why I talk about security in every single one of my talks or customer presentations is because it's the responsibility of every person to be conscious of it, but not necessarily be security experts. So there are so many amazing tools out there that we encourage our customers to utilize in the cloud when they go cloud native. And I'm going to just talk about one specifically. So you talked about pushing codes, secrets and keys. Absolutely. We look at the recent breach by our little friends at Uber, who always provide me with security breach stories. I literally can rely on Uber to tell a security breach story. And someone put a password in a PowerShell file. That's not the fault of the provider. It's the fault of the developer. And I think the problem is once we commit that code, we've committed that code, that history's there, that can be found out. Whereas if we look at things that can prevent the pushing of code. So what we're seeing in the industry is a lot of tools getting closer to the developer experience in their IDE. So I'm going to talk about GitHub push protection because I'm a big fan of it. It stops that key from getting into your repository. So using those cloud native tools are critical to helping that because you're right. As a developer, I'm in a rush, I'm under time pressure, or we just make a mistake because we're humans. Helping get closer to the developer experience is crucial because we can't always rely on peer reviews to catch everything. And so leveraging these tools is huge. It helps our teams.
Yes.
100%.
I totally agree with you. I mean, there are so many problems. For example, we have integrations with the IDEs because, for example, the Pandabot or our Frogbot, which actually does a lot of more stuff, it's too late already. It's part of the PR. It's already you already pushed the code. The developer already used some time to create the feature, and it's ready to. So it's too late. For example, we also are moving closer to the IDE. So when the developer is typing code, we're trying to provide as much feedback as possible. Mm-hmm. The problem when I'm saying here we're not security expert, it's because we're using, for example, right now I scan one particular pet clinic from some of other provider, microservice provider, and you will see that they have like thousands of security advisories, probably 10 critical. So, but that's my point when I said we're not security experts, because as a developer, I have that feedback at the fingertips of like in front of me. But how do I prioritize? Because if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And my budget, it is not mine. I mean, it has to come from our team leader, from our product owner. He has to say, you know what? These are really important to you. This is our critical but not exploitable. These are, even if they are medium critical, but we are in serious risk because of our particularly way of deploying the application. So this is when I say that we require, I cannot, as a developer, honestly, I cannot take that decision by myself, nor in the terms of the technical background that I possess to assess the threat, nor on the management part to actually invest our time, our developer time, into fixing something. So I need I need policies, seamless integration between the tools, and also some kind of trusted knowledge about those set risks.
You know, I was out in Las Vegas last week at the Qualys QSC conference, and this topic right here was top of mind. You know, the good folks at Miner and NIST came up with the CVE guidelines. Mitchell, you and I were doing them. It's still secure. What is it? Maybe 15 years ago, 16 years ago, something like that. 2004, 2005.
Seems like 10 minutes ago, but yeah.
And you know, and criticality of vulnerabilities. It was a good idea and a good start compared to what we had before. But it didn't take into account a lot of context. And context matters. Right? Mm-hmm. And so to run your shift left security vulnerability program based purely on CVEs is not, I would say it's malpractice, right? It's negligent. And you know, we need to understand, I think, Shimel, you hit some of these things. What's the availability, the exploitability? What is the cost to fixing that CVE or that vulnerability, right? And this gets into managed risk. Razor in the audience put out something in there in risk. At the end of the day, we can't lose sight that we don't do security for security's sake. Security is supposed to be about managing risk, right? And for the life of the developer, we need to kind of simplify that security, right? We need, the developer is probably not the person to decide what's the risk of leaving this vulnerability in there. We could try to automate that risk measurement with applications, right? With technology and process, but you need people, and those people aren't developers. Chad, I know, you know, you guys have thoughts on this at Boeing. What do you think?
Yeah, I what Shimel said really resonates with me, and I also agree with April's throwing in about the tools there, because you're right. The developer saying we're not security experts is very common, and then you go and get a security expert, and then you get into the trap of developers going, well, that's not my problem, that's their problem. They need to fix the security stuff, and,
right. And they're slowing me down. They're slowing me down. They're slowing me down.
Yeah, they're the gatekeepers, as was brought up, right? And so, and there's never enough, and usually they're not software developers, and so they don't understand the domain or the technicalities of what you're implementing, what your developers are implementing. So I think what I've seen, I'm like, the tools really help make developers more security experts, right? They illuminate issues and codes and sometimes, you know, recommend fixes for that, and that helps educate developers on becoming more security conscious as they move forward, so they don't implement that stuff as Mitch was talking about, you know, the shift left mentality. And so I think it's both. It's, you know, developers realizing they do have a responsibility for security and compliance for what they're developing, but you also have to have those tools in there that are finding stuff, because as April pointed out, right, it is a people problem almost all the time, and so you got to have those tools identifying where you made a mistake or where you took shortcuts, and helping you fix those and adjudicate those. And then yes, the overall risk of, does every CVE need to be fixed? No, you'll spend all of your day, and usually the first time you get a CVE tool and you throw it in to your CI/CD pipeline, you can sometimes get security people weaponizing security and saying, "Oh, we're going to fix everything. We're not going to have any CVEs," right? Which is a pipe dream. And you go up and down, right? It looks like a sine wave on there of what you're going to do, and you kind of normalize on evaluating things. And this is where developers do have to have some sort of security awareness, so that they can use the context of, okay, I'm in this environment, I have these protections in place already. Maybe I'm on a network that's not even connected to the internet, so I need to take that into account when I'm adjudicating some of these CVEs.
You know, I'd like to comment on what's happening in the chat. There's an explosion of ideas around risk management, and as a panel, we picked one aspect. I think Reza said it: security, right? But what we're trying to do here, and I'm going to bring it back to the main topic, Alan, if you don't mind here, of today,
Go ahead.
We're all trying to do trade-off. We're trying to evaluate business trade-offs. As a developer, you understand that my code has to be functionally tested, has to function and deliver the business use cases, the features, have pretty colors on the screen, work with people with disabilities, as well as have a great backend that scales to the moon or Mars or further, right? So as developers, we understand these aspects, but then there's security, there's resilience. We want our system to be constantly running and at huge amounts of scale. So then we're going to say we now need quality engineering as well. What we're doing as an industry is we're shifting all these things left. I know that's a buzzword, but today's topic is DevOps and cloud native, do they go together? Is one a prereq of the other? Are they the same cousins or whatever, right? So if we're thinking about shifting left, that is really what we're thinking in our CI, maybe CT, CD, continuous testing, continuous monitoring, continuous improvement, continuous learning, continuous everything process. We're talking about shifting things left, right? So how would you move into an environment which we call cloud native without having that shifted into your pipelines? So I think it is actually, we don't want to say it's a prerequisite, meaning, hey, don't stop your cloud native program because you're not mature enough in DevOps. You need to do this simultaneously. They symbiotically help each other. Why? Because we're all trying to make the business trade-offs. Is my code ready for release? I think Ishel mentioned that. For us to make that assessment, it's a risk management assessment that needs to be automated in our code. I need to scan whether I can maintain the code. How many duplicates are there? I need to scan for CVEs. I need to know how my keys are managed. Today, customers are not, they're getting more savvy than some of the providers. They're saying, I don't want bring your own key. I want customer provided key. I don't even want the provider, the cloud provider or the SaaS provider to have that key. They're getting more and more sophisticated. There's man in the middle attacks. There's supply chain attacks. Look at what happened with SolarWinds, right? We have to be savvy enough and automate that into our pipelines, or our customers will force us to do that. So yep. As the provider of SaaS.
Guys, I got to jump in here because I see what's going on in chat, and I got to, look, I started DevOps.com, but I've got 20 plus years in security. And for those people who are saying compliance is part of risk, I say nonsense. We have wasted way too much time in security trying to be compliance cops. And what we forgot was that compliance is no more than a byproduct of good security and good risk management. You do your security right, you do your risk management right, you don't got to worry about compliance. So for those who are saying DevSecOps is Dev Compliance Ops, nonsense. Nonsense. I don't care whether it's Deloitte or anyone else. Compliance comes from doing good security.
From right? having good policies defined,
and having good
being
policies
consistent.
And managing risk. It's not, right? It's not part of that risk. Now, you want to say there are things other than security and risk? There is, right? Have we picked the right platform? Is it scalable? Right? What are my risks to using Azure versus AWS or Google for a particular thing? That's part of risk management, right? But I don't think compliance is in there. Chad, I hope I didn't. Well, you sounded like you partially agree, but go ahead.
No, I was laughing. I was going to say, like, I love seeing the passion, and certainly spoken like a man who's been in the trenches for this for a while and learned some hard lessons. So yeah, I agree. DevSecOps, DevOps, I just kind of keep it at DevOps just because everything gets wrapped around there, and it's all about DevOps. It's all about your architecture and your CI/CD, right? Whether or not it's DevOps today or something else tomorrow, it's about that the tight feedback loops, security minded when you're doing things, doing what's right, and doing what makes sense given the context of the situation.
The one correction I'd make is compliance in there. What is compliance? Compliance with what? With security, with resilience, with performance, with delighting customers, with ADA compliance, with this and that and the other, right? I think compliance is baked in. this is what we're doing. We're slowly left shifting. We left shifted testing. We don't call it dev test ops. Why? Because untested code is crap. Let's face it. Okay, what's the value of untested code? So we just called it DevOps. Okay, continuous testing. We don't need a CI/CD because what use is it without testing, right? So, but it's not just testing in every way you can think of. It is the security, it's the resilience, it is all these little factors that make up compliance. And I think of compliance as an oversight to make sure you don't move so fast trying to win the Indy 500 without any breaks.
I think.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alan.
No, April, you
I was just taking your job away from you. We talk about compliance all the time, and that's usually the initial decision makers discussion. What are we trying to achieve? And then industries, financial. I do a lot of work in the financial industry services, FIS, and that's entertaining because they have compliance requirements that aren't compliance requirements. They have some legacy rule that someone's kind of made up, and they're like, but we must do this because it's been around for 30 years. And I'm like, but that doesn't work this way anymore. And it's not a black and white written rule. It's some interpretation. So I deal with that a lot. That's a hoot. And I really want someone to write the white paper to like all the banks and say, your compliance is wrong. These things are not actual compliance requirements. Someone has just interpreted that way. And then you all have felt that you need to believe it that way. So that's fun. But I was going to shift gears because we do have a question from the audience, which is amazing. Zach has acknowledged that, yes, security is huge. How do you control DevOps container security, i.e. preventing elevation of privileges and from within the application as well? So Zach's asked a pretty good question that I think we should throw down. Who wants to answer that? Chad looks like he wants to answer that one. Putting him on the spot. Man.
You got me right when I was taking a drink of coffee.
I know. That's exactly why I chose you.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, right? With the education of developers, right? Tools help a lot in this regards, right? You can get tools that will scan for some of those issues within your container and what base container you're using and what capabilities are there. So tools certainly help there. And the education of your developers, right? Making sure you're using a secure base container that doesn't allow elevation of those privileges. And hopefully, again, going back to the tools to help discover those and mitigate those and fail builds if you're using those, so you can't deploy those into production. Michelle, you look like you want to say something.
No, I agree with you. First of all, is having, like, for example, in that regard, it's I can give some tips, like having your registry of scan and approve already images, because we're trying to reduce and help our developers to make the right choices at the beginning. So making the right choice at the beginning, we already know a little bit about what they need. So we can provide already secure sources images for them to start like developing, or even some other images with more different configurations for different stages or staging environments. So yes, I agree with you, Chad. We are creating more and we are integrating more and more of this kind of tools to exactly reduce the options for the developers. We already but not like tighten them, like being in the way. No. There has to be a process that is fast and in a way intelligent. Like if you require this particular image and we already pre-approve it, there you go. If you have this requiring this dependency and we don't have it, let's see if it complies with what matters to our organization. If it matters with our organization and it's there, go ahead, use it. If it's not, we trigger something. Either we are going to analyze it or we provide you with an alternative. Doesn't work that alternative, let's come back to this process. So we are already doing that because we noticed that problem. And again, let's leave the machines do the machine work. Like this kind of decisions, it shouldn't, and for part of the process, it shouldn't be involved a human until you have this very corner cases where it's not well defined, and we shouldn't even be on the way of the developer.
There's two aspects to me of container security. One is involves the developer and one doesn't, right? I think when we look at container security, first you have to look at what's the payload of that container. Does the code contained within that container have vulnerabilities? Is it quality code? We could scan, there are plenty of tools out there that'll scan that code and tell you. And that's the kind of thing that a developer should be looking at even before deployment and so forth. But then there's a second aspect, and that's what April, I think, is talking about. And that is the configuration of these containers, right? What can they do? What can you do with them? How can you do it? You know, and there again, we have some good tools that have been developed around that, right? And I think it does lend itself to a good DevOps methodology. But certainly, we're still learning, I think, let's put it this way. There's not best practices yet. There's emerging practices.
Well, I think that's why we're in tech, because we're constantly learning. I always tell people, if I wanted a boring job, I'd go be an accountant, because numbers don't change. They're factual. They're black and white. You know, tax laws might change, but numbers don't change. We're in tech because we're always learning, and that's what keeps it fun and interesting. And DevOps is a continual process, and always learning, always changing. And you're right, we have a way that works now, and that's hard for a lot of organizations to say, well, what's my 5-10 year plan? And I'm like, I can't tell you this application is going to be around in 10 years, because in 10 years, but think about the last 10 years, what has come out in 10 years, right? I don't have a 5-year personal plan because I work in DevOps.
Do I?
The tech could change. The cloud could fall in on itself. Or I don't know, some new groundbreaking thing comes out, and that's my new favorite thing to work with. I don't know. Yeah, I think you have to be adaptable and agile to an extent, but you have to love learning as well.
Sure. Guys, I got to take a quick break. We, on these shows, we give out 4 Amazon gift cards every show. And I have to announce the winners. I hope I could read them it's up on a monitor far away from me. So we've got, the winners are, looks like Muriel D, Zach V, Reza A, and Kimberly S. I hope I got the names right. Our folks will reach out to you and get you your Amazon gift cards. Thank you very much. Guys, we have less than 10 minutes left here. I'd like to focus in, make sure we answer the question that we started with. Do we need DevOps to do cloud native? We've circled round and round and round here. We've talked about some amazing, great topics. I want to make sure that people leave here with an answer from us. So I'm going to go to each of you and give you your closing arguments, if you will, being last week was election day. April, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Do we need DevOps for cloud native? Yep, go ahead.
I'm going to say yes, flatly, pretty simply, because if you're not, life is going to be painful and you won't adopt it. You won't want to continue. So I'm going to say yes. To be successful, yes.
Great. Chad?
Yeah, to be successful, yes. They're like chocolate and peanut butter. They work okay separately, but they're much better together. And definitely you should be doing both.
Michelle, how about you?
Yes, everything. It's way better. Like, not doing it, it's still possible, but it's going to be so painful. It's like you can eat every mushroom in the world at least once, but you probably want to eat it twice.
Okay. Parag, how about you?
Okay, I will say this. If you're a company that doesn't need to change, and I would even argue even accounting is changing. How you capitalize R&D expenditures changes every year, right? So if you're a company that believes in stagnation, believes that change is not the normal modus operandi, don't want to learn, yeah, maybe forget about DevOps. But then I'd ask, why did you go after a cloud native in the first place? Right? It is the ability to adapt, ability to change, to take on the unknown. The biggest risk that we haven't all called out is the unknown risks. And it's how you react that matters. Okay, so if we are true risk managers and we believe that this is a changing world, then DevOps is such an absolute requirement that it's a prerequisite to success. The only thing I'd say is it's a journey. Don't stop innovating and building out your microservices, building a private cloud on premises, or going to a public cloud and refactoring your applications to take advantage of all this. because you believe your DevOps maturity is too low. No, solve these problems simultaneously in parallel. And when you see the other side, I will argue DevOps is one of the greatest money makers of businesses around the globe today, because it gets all of our imagination out to production faster with risk in mind.
Yeah, well said.
Excellent. Hey, Mitchell, I'm going to give you the last word, man.
Okay. Well, first of all, I had to laugh at his show because we just voted on mushrooms in Colorado, so it passed. By the way, anyway, so
What a surprise!
yeah, surprise, shocking. I know. Hey, this is just a fantastic panel, and one of the things I've always wished is that I wish other people could really experience what it's like to create software, because it's not just sitting in front of an IDE and writing code into it. There's so much more to it. It's really putting so many things together, and that's very representative by this conversation of why we talked about so many dimensions of this. And maybe this is a good way to get a better feel for what it's really like to be an architect or a software developer. So I might take this recording and play it for folks. My answer is yes, and it's part of how we created this question, because if you're going to do microservices, and that's kind of what I think is the heart of cloud native, is doing microservices, you're going to do that at scale and deliver code quickly at velocity. Yes, you could try doing it without, but to do it at very high velocity speeds, you've got to do something like DevOps, and that's what our kind of current generation of how to create software. So, I really wish everybody a great progress on their journey, because we're all on different points in that path, and applying this to our worlds. And back to April, the 5-year plan was different yesterday, if we had one. So back to you, Alan.
Thanks, Mitchell. Folks on our panel, what a great panel this is. We'd love to run it back. Sounds like we could talk security, DevOps, cloud native, whatever we'd like. I'd love to have you all back in here. We'll ask our producers to try to make that happen. Even to my friend Reza out in the audience, we'd love to have you on. Let's talk about compliance not equals security at some point too. I'd love to have that conversation. Most of all, to all of you who joined in live today, and even to those who are watching this on demand. We get a lot of people watch these on demand. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. And then finally, big thank yous to our friends at Tricentis, who make this whole series possible. We couldn't do it without them. Thank you. This is Alan Shimel. We're going to call it a wrap on this episode of DevOps Unbound. We'll be back on with one of our regular recorded shows in the next week or so, and we'll be doing one of these in the next month. So we'll hopefully catch you then. Take care, everyone, and good luck.